everyone? Oh, all right. Got it. Thank you so much, Karen. Happy New Year, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here. I know it hasn't been easy for early childhood field right now with everything that's going on, but teachers and administrators were very resilient, and we got to find ways to move on, right? So I'm hoping that this presentation will provide you with some new ideas, some new methods and strategies and techniques that you can share along with your colleagues, with other teachers, and that you can implement in the classroom, whether it's live or virtually, hoping that this will be a benefit for all of you. My name is Alan Rosales. I'm actually the Senior Program Advisor for Carol Robertson Center in Chicago, for learning in Chicago. I've been in the field over 27 years in different capacities, as a coach, as education manager. I presented at conferences across the nation with NACI and Head Start and NABE and different kinds of organizations. I also teach at National Louis University and Roosevelt University, bilingual education courses, early childhood courses. And I've been doing that for a while. And today we're going to be sharing with you the concept of storytizing, which is a literature inquiry approach to teaching young children. This is something that is known in the early childhood field, but it's a little bit different. It's an arts-based approach to teaching children literature, and we'll talk about that in a second. For today's objectives, we're describing what storytizing means. There's 3 components to that. We're going to be analyzing child-created storybooks, which is always fun to see what the kiddos have created with the support of the teachers. And we're planning to engage, helping children engage in higher level thinking experiences. And that's one of the takeaways that I hope that you're able to obtain from this presentation is how do you engage children in higher level thinking through a storybook lens, right? And then the importance of connecting story elements to children's real world experiences. If you're able to come on camera, that would be great. We are going to, I'm going to ask you to participate in conversations, writing in the chat and so forth. We learn from each other, right? We learn from each other's perspectives and opinions and comments. And so the more all of us are able to share those perspectives, the more we learn from each other. So I really encourage you all to participate. And so let's start with the connector. On the chat, share what's your favorite children's storybook and provide a one-word feeling or emotion that it produces. So when you think about storybooks, right, either in the past or currently, what's your favorite storybook? And what's a feeling or emotion that it produces? Oh, okay, so I see The Little Mermaid produces wonder. Jillian Jiggs, happiness. Oh, that's funny. Thank you, Anne. Megan says, jelly beans for breakfast, imagination. Oh, I love that. The Hungry Caterpillar, yeah, that's a classic. Dream Girl, oh, I haven't seen that one. Love You Forever, yes. Yes, that was beautiful, that makes us cry. The Little Engine That Could, Courage, Love You Forever, absolutely. The Hungry Caterpillar, Iris Sleeps Over. Awesome. Let's see if there, well, I'll wait a couple more seconds here to see if anyone else has more storybooks. I got 2 Dogs by John Lithgow. Oh, I have to see that one. That sounds interesting. Wonderful, folks. So thank you for sharing. Oh, there's a couple more. The Mitten, Yes, for sure. Fun sing song. Don't give the pigeon. Oh, drive the bus. Yeah, I love that one too. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so these books where the wild things are. These books produce a lot of emotions in us, right? They have the power to remain in our memory for a long time, right? That's the power of storybooks, and they produce so much emotions, right? Throughout our careers, throughout our lives, and even though they produce so much emotion, um, when you think about it, a majority of educators tend to focus only on asking children what happened in the book, right? Like what happened in the book. Even in our assessment systems, right? One of the objectives says, can the child retell? And so we ask the children, what happened in the book? And they say, well, this happened, this happened, this happened. Check, right? We check our objective, it's done. But however, based off of our own data, right? Our live data, emotions, what happened to the emotions part, right? Emotions play a big part of stories. And so that's one of the components that I'm going to talk about is giving children the opportunity to study literature through emotions, through character development, through the physical environment, right? And solving problems. So there's this way of really turning read alouds into instructional read alouds and turning instructional read alouds into literature studies, right? We can take a single book and study it for a long time, sometimes 2 weeks, 3 weeks, even 4 weeks, and the reason for doing that is research tells us that children learn best when they revisit and engage, revisit and engage, and revisit and engage, right? And so that's one of the things we have to take into consideration is how do we turn our read alouds into instructional read alouds and then into literature studies so that the children could benefit from all the revisiting and analyzing of material. And so that's what storytizing is. Storytizing is an art form where we find rich context in the stories, not only in the stories, but in children's real world experiences, right? We can have a combination of reading books for recreation, which is really important, but also digging deeper and finding out, in this storybook, what are children interested in? And how does this interest align to children's real world experiences? And then how do we engage children critically, not just in plot development, like I was saying, where we ask children to retell what happened in the story, but think critically about the characters, think critically about the setting that they're in, and think critically about the plot. And when we do that, and when we engage them in literature studies, we can develop children as authors and illustrators. And this is different than your typical, reading for recreational purposes. When we engage them in literature studies and illustrations, creating their own storybooks, right? It's they become authors, like real life authors and real life illustrators. And that's taking stories to a deeper level when we're able to do that with children. So I want to share with you one child-created storybook. And child-created just means that the child wrote it, the child illustrated it, and with the help of the teacher who was trained in inquiry, story-based inquiry. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to show you some methods and strategies today to ask critical thinking questions with a story lens. Okay, and some of the handouts that you have will help you to do that on your own too, so you can practice. And so this story took about a month to create. And that's because the teacher read 3 separate books throughout the month that related to the topic of community and culture. And so I'm going to read this book for you. It's one of my favorite child-created storybooks, and it's called I Dreamed the World. And if you notice, what makes it beautiful also is that the child used watercolors, right? And so this is an art form because not only is the child and the teacher working together on creating a story, it's also learning how to use watercolors proficiently, which is another art form, right? And so the more art media you use, the more cognitively demanding it becomes for the child. And so part of this approach is getting the children to think critically, for their cognitive activity to be very active, instead of passive, right? Instead of just hearing a story and retelling, no, we want them to be active at telling us their own story. All right, so I dreamed the world. I dreamed the world where all kids could go to the park and be safe. They could play together and get along and not fight with everyone. All kids from different families could play in the park together. And take a look at the language, take a look at the drawings, and think about the cognitive activity that's happening at that moment. I dreamed a world where all kids could go to school, no matter their color of the skin. They could play together and learn together and read great stories together. And you can see the child's starting some inventive spelling, right? Has some letters there that represents the word school, S-K-O-L, which is great. And I think it says boys on the bottom there with a backwards Y, but still pretty good. I dreamed a world where all kids could have something to eat. No kids could not eat, and there is a lot of food for the kids to eat and be full. All kids around the world needs food. I dreamed a world where all kids had a place to live. There could not be no more homeless kids living on the streets and in the garbage cans. All kids around the world could live in a house, building, or apartment. Again, a full composition, right? And it takes the teacher to be scaffolding, not only scaffolding the narrative, but also scaffolding the illustrations and making sure that there's a full composition, right? So challenging the children on their drawings, like what else could you add? What else do you see on a home? What do you see from outside the home? What do you see inside the home? Oh, I see the little girl. What else? What other characteristics can you add to the girl's appearance and so forth, right? Like keep it going, like extending that thinking. I dreamed a world where all kids had a family that loved them, a mom and a dad and a grandma and a grandpa. We can all be brothers and sisters and love each other from all over, from other places like family. I dreamed a world where all kids could be friends with each other and be happy and treat each other nice. We could hold hands and show everyone how to be friends with each other. All kids could play together and would have lots of friends. I dreamed the world where all kids could live in peace. The world would be good and the people could take care of it. No kids would die from guns, and when they grow up, there could be no wars, fighting, gangs, homeless, hungry, segregation, and racism. What world do you dream of? Yeah. And so I'm gonna pause here, and if we can have some feedback, some comments on the chat, and also we can have a couple people live and just comment on what they thought about the story.
So in the process of the while writing this, I'm just gonna take a guess here. Did the instructor ask about
Oh, I'm sorry, we lost you there.
or mainly draw a picture first to go with it?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? You cut in and out.
Sorry.
No problem.
Yes, Zoom is always really weird for me. So
Uh,
like what I do with my kids, I was saying, is like I have them say you have to imagine it in your head first, the colors, the people. We work on real life events right now. Use your memory, what happened first, second, third, in the moment your story took place. So for this instruction, was the student instructed to think about the images first and how they wanted to tell their story and then go into the words, or was it the other way around? That's what I'm thinking, because this is extremely visual.
Yeah, so the process, and I'll show it in a little bit. The process is that we read specific books to the children, and some of those images might be in the book, not exactly the same, but they give some models, right, to give some ideas. And so as they're reading the books, there's great questions that are going on. And we'll practice that in a second. But questions about, so like here, there had to be a lot of questions about the physical environments, right? What do you notice from these illustrations? The backgrounds, the scenery, nature, all of that. And then there's conversations about, what about in your neighborhood, in your home? What do you see, right? And that's where they develop the context for their narrations and for the illustrations. Because when you see this last page, right, the narration is interesting because in the books that they read, it didn't say anything about gangs or wars. That's something that the child already came with. But that was really important because they made that connection that if we're talking about a world, a better place, and they're able to say, connect that, well, I'm experiencing gangs in my neighborhood. I'm experiencing fighting or violence, right? That's really important that it comes out. And so it's a combination of some of the illustrations from the storybooks that are being provided. So for example, if Goldilocks and the Three Bears, which we're going to talk about later on, that has a lot of nature in there, right? So that's something that builds up background knowledge, but then we also want to include the children's own context, so their homes, their neighborhoods, and so forth.
Okay, I see.
Thank you for speaking up. Can I have one more volunteer for comments or questions? Let's see, I'm gonna put the chat here. Let's see. So the age of the child he's 4 years old. Well, he said it's awesome. Yeah, I think it's awesome too. That child is very aware of all the issues facing students. This is very deep and amazing for 4-year-old. Wondering if they are living lifestyle. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, these children, actually from this school, yeah, they experience gangs and violence and fightings and shootings, unfortunately. So part of the process of storytizing, not only is it academically and cognitively enriching, it's also a trauma-informed care opportunity, right? Where you have children that experience trauma or experience inequities, and they're able to share those with us so we can work with them, right? Any other comments? Anybody else want to come on live and share with us? Rosemary also says it appears that the teacher has been asking many open-ended questions. Children, and appears children have developed skills in answering. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, you got it. You got it. So through storytizing and an inquiry-based approach, that becomes part of the culture, right? It's like a mini a microculture in the classroom where inquiry is the norm. And so children get used to just answering questions, asking questions with each other, responding to the teachers. And it's amazing how sometimes the children themselves start asking great questions to the teachers just to clarify and to challenge the teachers in what they're saying, which is pretty interesting. So thanks for sharing. And so this is the Storytizing document. You should all have this. It was shared with you all. And it's basically storytizing is the process of engaging children in these three elements for understanding, right? Character development, setting development, and plot development. Like I was mentioning earlier, in many classrooms, because of our assessment systems, sometimes we only focus on retelling. And that's good, right? That's part of the story development process, because it's about sequence of events, right? What happened first, what happened second, what happened third. However, the art of storytizing is that we strategically create lessons where maybe on Monday we're focused on character development. And that means that we're asking really good questions about the character's personality, right? Maybe we're asking good questions about their physical features, or asking good questions about the character's ideas, their motivations, right? Their feelings, their emotions. And then we delve deep into that. And then we relate that to the children's own feelings and emotions and physical characteristics. That's a whole lesson right there, just with character development. And then maybe on Tuesday or Wednesday, we might ask some questions about the setting. And what did they see in the setting? What was in the background? Why do you think the author created such a setting, right? Like at what time is this happening? What does the atmosphere look like, right? Is there tension? Is it scary? What's happening in the atmosphere? And then maybe Thursday or Friday, you might ask some plot questions, right? Not only can you tell, but what are the problems in the story? What other problems do you see that could happen? What other solutions can you come up with? If you were the character, how would you solve the problem? And so all these wonderful questions that you can ask throughout the week or throughout a longer literature study. And that's what this is. Storytizing is the art form where it's almost like drawing a painting, where you use different colors to paint a picture, right? Well, here you use different elements. For one day, you use this piece to paint a picture in the child's mind, to think about it and visualize it. And then the next day, there's another component, and then the next day, there's others, right? And that's how they're able to acquire a lot of understanding about the story. And eventually, they'll be able to do that with all stories. And that's what we want, right? Where they're able to make great connections amongst the stories and relationships. And what I mean by relationships is that the element of personality that's seen in character development has a relationship with cause and effect. And the environment has a relationship with the problem and solution. So all these different elements, if we're able to put them together through inquiry, we want the children to see that there's relationships between these different elements, and that for the rest of their academic career, that's what's going to make good readers. That's what's going to make great students, is that they understand that there's different elements to stories, and being able to pick up on those will make me a better reader and be able to understand what I'm reading and seeing. Okay, so I'd like you to take out this sheet here, the questioning patterns chart. So I'll give you a few seconds. I'm going to switch mode because I want to use the actual document which is here. Nope, that's not. Let me 1 second, please. Zoom. Who's going to this one? All right, let me close this one. Doesn't like that. This is the question chart. There it is. Okay. So this is a strategy that I created a while back. It's one of my favorite tools to develop teachers' inquiry practices. It's pretty powerful. And what happens is I like to show that there's 4 different kinds of approaches to inquiry, right? And you see the 4 columns there. The first one is a questioning approach. And this is all about how you engage children in the thinking process. How do you approach children when you're asking questions, right? It's really important to know. Right? Are you approaching children with a teacher-directed lens? Here, let me highlight this so you can see it. Can you see the highlighted area? Okay, great. So are you asking questions in a teacher-directed approach? Are you asking questions that are teacher-guided? Or are you asking questions that are child-centered? Right? There's 3 of them. And we'll talk about them in a little bit. But those are 3 different approaches. And if it's just teacher-directed approaches, that's going to tell you the cognitive activity that's happening in the child's mind, if it's low level or high level. And same thing with teacher-guided and child-centered. And we'll talk about that in a second. The second part is questioning content. Is your question actually a question about the characters in the book, the setting, or the plot? Sometimes we'll have questions that have nothing to do with the story. They might have to do with the child's weekend, what they did in the weekend. Like a lot of responses, the kids will say, oh, we went to Chuck E. Cheese, and then the whole conversation talks about Chuck E. Cheese and what they did there and playing games, right? And we forget that, oh, wait a minute, I need to focus on character development today. And then the third one is the one that is well known in the field, is closed and open-ended questions, right? Are you asking closed or open-ended questions? And then the fourth one, which is the more difficult one, but one of the most important, is questioning styles. And this has to do with lower level questions and higher level thinking questions. So attention focusing questions, recall questions, predictions, those are considered lower level thinking questions, even though they're still important, right? For example, for those that wrote down The Very Hungry Caterpillar, if I were to ask you, what did the hungry caterpillar eat, right? Right away you would say, oh, they ate a leaf, or they ate an apple. So there wasn't a lot of critical thinking there. You already knew that. That's memory. And so that's good for the teacher to see where the child is at, or to know what the child knows, but it's not heavy thinking, right? It's not cognitively benign. But if I were to ask about The Very Hungry Caterpillar, and if I were to ask someone, well, how could they store the food for the winter? Whoa, hold on a second. You're going to make me think there, right? That's a little bit harder. So that's problem posing. Right? There's a problem. The winter's coming. How do we ensure that the caterpillar has enough food for the winter, right? And those kinds of questions. And so what happens here is, and I always, this is part of research that I do with teachers, the rows represent each question that you or a teacher asks during a read aloud. And so what I would do is record yourselves reading to children, and then write down all the questions that you asked them, right? Whether there were 10 questions, 15, 20 questions, it's up to you. And then each question is coded in each one of these columns. And we'll practice that in a second. But for example, if I said, what did the caterpillar eat? That would be a teacher directed, right? Question, so I would put TD here. And because I said, what did he eat? That's considered a plot question. And then this will be considered closed. And this would be recall question, okay? And that's how you code, very simple. However, when you code all your questions, let's say we ask 10 questions, what ends up happening is you'll see a pattern. And this is why I call this your questioning patterns chart, storytizing questioning patterns chart. Because the minute you code all your questions here, let's say you code all 10, you'll start seeing a pattern. And this is significant because this will tell you, I asked 10 teacher-directed questions. I wonder why, right? What's the kind of thinking that the children are doing with that? How can I balance it out? How can I transform this teacher-directed question into a child-centered question, and so forth? And that's the power of this simple tool, is for all of us to transform our practices strategically, right? Expert teachers, what they're really good at is transforming their own practices. They self-assess themselves, they self-analyze their practice, and they self-transform their practice. You know, it's excellent when they have colleagues that help them and they're involved with groups, but on their own, they do that. You know, they're able to self-assess, self-analyze, self-transform. And this is the pattern, this is the skill that they have to enhance their practices throughout their career. And I love this methodology because very often we have experts that or assessors, right, that come into the classroom and they'll assess an educator for about an hour or two, and then they leave and they provide some data, right? And so all the cognitive activity happened within that assessor, not the teacher. The teacher only saw the data, right? They only saw the numbers, which is good too. That's part of assessment, that's part of professional development as well. But in this instance, when you use questioning patterns charts, it's the teacher that's being challenged. It's the teacher who's self-assessing themselves, looking at these patterns, coming up with plans to transform their own practices. And so that's a really powerful way to develop your practice. Okay, let me go back to the PowerPoint. Let's see what you got. Let me 1 second. Yeah. And so let's look at these a little bit closer. And we're going to look at it through a Goldilocks lens, right? I think many of us, it's a classic, right? I love Goldilocks and the Three Bears. So it was a classic when I was young. It's a classic now. And there's so many versions, right, of Goldilocks and Three Bears. So hopefully remember what happened. I even put the photos there, right? Where Goldilocks goes in, she tastes some food, she breaks a chair, and then she sleeps on the bed, and then she has the nerve to leave, right? Without even talking with the bears. So let's talk about the inquiry approach. So that first column, right? And so with a teacher-directed lens, the cognitive activity is mainly on the educator side, right? Because it's us, it's the educator that's coming up with the question in our mind and asking the children. And the responses are quick, right? Because they know it already, it's all memory-based. And these are important. Teacher-directed questions are important to find out what the child knows. Sometimes it's important to warm up the children's brain, their mind, right? It's like a warm-up. Like if we're exercising, we want to warm up first. But we don't want to stay there, right? Unless the child, that's where they're at that level still. If they're very young and they're still in a place where they can't answer the more cognitive demanding questions, then that's fine. That's what teacher-directed questions are for as well. Then you have teacher-guided questions. And this is where the cognitive activity is shared, right? So the teacher comes up with a question and scaffolds, gives some clues to the child without giving them the answer. And so then the child has to figure out a solution to the problem. And so with teacher guided questions, it's like guiding the children to the truth of something without giving them the answer, right? And we do that all the time. Like, we don't want to give them the answer, but we give them a little clue. Hey, look over here. How could you solve this problem over here? Or let's look at this together, right? And those are teacher guided questions. Those are important when children can't figure it out on their own. And then you have child-centered questions. We have to be able to use these quite often. And this is where the cognitive activity is mainly on the child's side. And we really want that, right? We want that problem solving to be on the child's side. We want them to think critically. The responses are more challenging, and it's more holistic reasoning and problem solving. And so some examples of these are teacher directed. How many bears were there in the story? Right, that's pretty simple. Goldilocks and three bears, 3 bears. How did the bears feel that their food was eaten? How did the bears feel at the end of the story? They were angry, they were upset, they were hurt. For teacher guided questions, how else could the 3 bears convince Goldilocks to respect their food? What other ideas could the bears give Goldilocks to respect their home? How can the community help Goldilocks to stop entering homes without permission? Those are pretty nice, right? And we're guiding them to solve certain problems that could occur in the stories. And then for child-centered, what could the bears do to stop feeling sad? Why do you think the bears were sad? What ideas can you come up with to stop Goldilocks from entering the home? And so one rule of thumb that I always share with teachers and educators when it comes to your inquiry approach is the I, we, you concept, right? If I want to know something about you, I know it might be a teacher-directed question because it's all about me. The we is the teacher-guided because we're working together, even though I'm not giving you the answer, right? I'm giving you some clues and scaffolding your thinking. We're working together to solve this problem. And then the you is all about the child. How can you solve that? What ideas can you come up with? And so forth. So that's just a rule of thumb, the I, we, you, just to remember about inquiry approach processing. Any questions on the approach? Any comments? And you can come off your mute and share any ideas or comments you might have about approach or why this is so important when it comes to inquiry. Yes.
I didn't realize, I'm sitting here trying to think about how I question the kids when we're reading through stories and stuff. And I really like the child center thinking, but again, it's a higher level activity for the kids. Sorry, I've got my baby.
Oh, beautiful. No, we love babies.
It's a higher level thinking. And so the kid, like sometimes you have to even walk the kids through that. And I mean, that's what's going to get them to being excellent readers and to be empathic, with whatever they do and whoever they're with.
You
so
got
I
it.
really like that.
Awesome. Absolutely, yeah. So you have these 3 approaches, and what I like to do, that's an art form, right? Like you ask a child-centered question. If they can't answer it, then you go back. You ask a teacher-guided question with a little clue. If they can't answer it, then you go back, right? You ask a teacher-directed question. And so it's like this dance of going back and forth between these 3 approaches, whatever it takes to support the thinking of the children. Whether it's stories or whether it's math inquiry or science inquiry, it's the same thing. This approach transfers across content areas. It's not just with stories. We use this with STEM education, with math, with trauma-informed care, everything. It's just good practice. Thank you, Bernadette, for sharing. And then there's content, right? This is the more easy one. Whether it's simple, does it have a story focus, right? Or it doesn't. So many times I hear, if we look at other, what color is this? What shape is this? What number is this, right? And so these are important, but if we're asking that during a read aloud, because if we're focusing on the tree that has green leaves or the brown bark or whatever it is, that's okay, but you don't want to stay there, right? Because we want to focus on elements of the story. And so that's really important to notice as well. So when you have a chance, you're able to record yourselves and then write down the question that you asked. You'll be able to see if the questions that you asked were based off of the story or not. Oh, I'm sorry. I see in the chat, Bob wrote a little something. It says, I assume that the teacher directed or child-centered is not really 100% correct, but maybe more. Yeah, absolutely. That's just me saying that it's more than the teacher directed. So that's good. Thanks for that logic. Yeah, it's all over the place. It'll never be precise, right? Because we don't have, we wouldn't be able to capture that. But as a whole, it's about the cognitive activity is on that side, right, of the room, as opposed to the teacher. And if we only ask teacher-directed questions, then that's an inequity, right? And that's actually an inequity that occurs in many of our communities, where the children only receive teacher-directed questions and only receive reading for recreation. There's no instructional read alouds, there's no literature studies, right? And that's not fair, right? And so I'm hoping that with this information, we can share that with others so that they can also benefit from these ideas. And then you have the literature inquiry type. This one is one that is well known also in the field. It's about closed or open-ended questions. When you ask closed-ended questions, they're simple. They're either single word response or, so it's a single word response, or they respond with a sentence that they already know. So that's considered closed-ended questions. So it's not only if they respond with one or two words. If they respond with something they already know, then it's closed-ended, right? So we ask, for example, why did Goldilocks go into the house? Well, the author told us in the beginning in one of the books that Goldilocks was a naughty little girl, right? In one of the versions, it says, well, Goldilocks was a naughty little girl. And so if the child responds with that phrase, then that's closed-ended because they know that already. Open-ended though, and so closed-ended questions do have their place. They're important because they set the scene, right? It's almost like that warm-up that I was talking about. It's a warm-up for the mind, it's a warm-up for the brain. Open-ended questions though will help you generate. It's all about generating ideas, challenging them, and requiring more elaborate responses. And that's why open-ended questions are important, because they promote reasoning.
If I could say here, at my school, I don't know if any other schools are using this approach, but at my school, we do something called standards-based thinking, where we encourage kids up to like in pre-K all the way through 8th grade to go back into the text and point out exactly where they find their evidence that helps them generate ideas. So like when you're saying Goldilocks was a naughty little girl, and if a student asks me like or says like I think she's naughty, and I say, can you give me text evidence? And we usually bracket it for like younger kids, where like we'll say, okay, which text, 1 or 2? And then she'll say, oh, text 2, and I can see in here the word naughty comes up and there's a picture of what she's doing, so I know she's naughty, and they can point out details at such a young age. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's great. That we can actually, here, let me move to the next one. So that one might fit like the proof. You see, oops, you see on the bottom there, I have proof questions. And that, it almost sounds like what you were talking about, where they're validating their reasoning, right?
Yes, yes. So we're very strict about standards language. They have to use like this evidence in this text. Like we're very strict about making sure they're using the right language.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So that's really good. So I would say that that's a proof question, because you're asking them to prove, and proof just means validation. You got to validate that. The only difference I would see is, and they're both good. One is validate what the book said, and then the other one is validate your perspective, right? Validate your reasoning, and they're both good. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. It does. Yes.
Thank you for sharing that. And so for the style, again, it's this group of processes: attention focusing, recall, conjecture, prediction. Those are all considered lower level thinking, but they're still important, right? So bringing the child's attention to a specific section of the book or to a specific characteristic, that's important. Recall questions, they're important, right? It's not higher level thinking, but they're important. Remembering the events in the story. Conjecture, if it's math. Prediction, if it's stories. You know, what's going to happen in the book? Let's do a story walk where we look at the book without reading it first. And then afterwards, once you've seen all the illustrations, what do you think it's about? What do you think is going to happen? Comparisons, right? You're comparing Goldilocks and the Three Bears to the Three Billy Goats Gruff, and having conversations. And then the higher level thinking comes with reasoning, which is a perspective, their personal perspective. Problem posing, where they're doing their own personal problem solving. And then proof, which is what you mentioned earlier, where you're validating your reasoning based off of facts, which is pretty cool. Some example questions: attention focusing. How do you think the strangers felt on this page? Recall, why did the chair break when Goldilocks sat on it? Prediction, what would happen if the police saw Goldilocks in the house? Sorry, this is a little technical. Comparison, what's the difference between Papa Bear's porridge and Baby Bear's porridge? That's a good one. Reasoning, why do you think Goldilocks needed to go through the bear's things? Then problem posing, what can the community do to help keep the neighborhood safe? So these are all opportunities for thinking at various levels. And so now it's time for us to practice together, okay? And we're gonna base it off of the Goldilocks and the Three Bears storybook. So please, please, please try your best to participate. You can write on the chat. You can also unmute and share. And so here's the first one: character development, right? And these are some of the elements that I put on that sheet. Personality, right? Being brave, shy, scared, mean, and so forth. And we saw that with Goldilocks, and we saw that with the Three Bears, right? Each one of them had a different personality, different physical features, different ideas. You know, Goldilocks had some motivations. I wonder what motivated her, right? Like what were her plans? And then feelings and emotions. And so I'm going to challenge you a little bit right now by going on the chat and writing some questions, some higher level thinking questions based off of personality, physical features, ideas, concepts, motivations, or feelings and emotions that you could ask the children if you were reading Goldilocks and the Three Bears to them tomorrow. What would that look like? Look in the chat here. All right, so let's take some time to think about that. What kind of questions would you ask that are based off of character development? And then when you write them down, I'll choose a few and we can analyze them. Thank you, Bernadette. So how do you think Goldilocks felt when she first found the bear's house in the woods? Okay, in our version, she got lost in the woods. Oh, okay. Yeah, there's different versions. How would you feel if someone broke your chair or ate your food? Yeah, that's a good question too. Well, you guys are professionals here. I love it. How do you think the bears felt about Goldilocks when they found her in their house? Oh yeah. Let's see. How could the bears reason with Goldilocks when they caught her? Nice. How could the three bears prevent this from happening in the future? Wow, nice. What would you do if Goldilocks entered your home? What could Goldilocks have done instead of running away? Oh, these are wonderful. What personality did Papa Bear have when he saw his chair broken? Why do you think that the bears and Goldilocks were different in skin height or in height? In skin or height? Oh, nice. All right, so let's capture a couple of these, okay? And then what I'm going to ask you is to code what whether they're teacher directed, teacher guided, or child centered. Okay, so let me choose one here. Let's see. So let's take this one. Thank you, Linda, for this question. It says, how would you feel if someone broke your chair or ate your food? So on the chat, would that be a teacher directed question, teacher guided, or child centered question? How would you feel if someone broke your chair and ate your food? See, that one's interesting. I love the question. Let's see what you all think. Would that be considered a teacher directed, teacher guided, or child centered? So we're getting some child centered. Oh, do you think Goldilocks ever worried about getting caught? That's a good question. Child centered. Yeah, this one's interesting because it is a child centered, but it would elicit a simple response, right? And so it might be considered teacher directed as well, depending on the context. And so, yeah, I love that question. So that one, you know, it's, wow, that's a tough one. I love it. Yeah. If I would say it's child centered. However, it's almost like a closed-ended question because it's one-worded response, and the child, if they know it right away, then you know the thinking is a starting point, right? Now from there we can move forward and have them explain, like some of you are saying right now, right? Like finding evidence, maybe look for more evidence or more reasoning of why they felt sad or anxious or mad or angry and so forth. So thank you for sharing that one. I'm going to choose one more. Let's see. Let me choose this last one that I saw. Where'd it go? Oh, how about this one? Oh, no, wait. There's so many. This is wonderful. Ooh, so Linda's, would you ever run away from home and break into another person's home? So if we were to ask, if I were to ask you all, would you ever run away and break into another person's home? Would that be a teacher directed or child-centered question or teacher guided question? We know it's not teacher guided at this point. That's a tough one too, right? I wouldn't say it's teacher guided because they're not guiding them to solve a problem at this point. But if we change the language, it could be teacher guided for sure. Yeah, teacher directed. Only because if the child already knows the response quickly, like if they just say no, like if you say, would you run away and go into another person's house? And if they say no, then that's already a simple response, right? But if we were to say, what about if your friend, how could you help your friend who's lost in the woods? Now they have to think a little bit more, right? So that's more child-centered. And so the point of this, and thank you all for participation. This is wonderful, all of you. The point of this exercise is that whether we think it's right or wrong, it doesn't matter. It's just having that conversation of, is it teacher directed, teacher guided, or child centered, and then analyzing it a little bit more, right? Well, let's have this conversation because maybe it isn't. But if we add 2 words to the sentence, now it becomes child centered. Or if we change this word here, now it becomes teacher guided. And that's what's fun about engaging these kinds of experiences. Is it's not about right or wrong. It's just about the process and helping each other develop these analyzation skills over time. Wonderful. Okay, let's go to setting development. So with setting development, obviously you have the environment, right? So there's a location, like in this illustration in front of us. There's a location, there's a place. It could be an urban setting, rural. There's positioning, there's direction, time, there's entities, habitat, ecosystems, land. Like there's so many things about the environment. And that's the physical environment, right? But you also have the climate and the atmosphere. So when you see the illustration in front of you, what's the atmosphere? What's the attitude of the bears? What's the feel of the environment, right? That's really important too, for us to be able to read the environment and where we're at. And then time, right? When was this, in the past, present, future, morning, afternoon? All of that. These are really important. So on the chat, see if you can ask some higher order thinking questions. In higher order, remember reasoning, problem posing, child-centered. What would that look like? What would a setting development question look like? Could help us decode story elements like mood. Yes, absolutely. Snow could be cold, tree, yeah. How was the sky? Very good. Where do the bears live? How do you know? What do you see? And that's what I mean by teacher-directed questions. It's a great starting point. Like like a lot of these that are teacher-directed, so where do the bears live, right? And then a child could already know, in the forest or somewhere else, or Antarctica, whatever they say. And then you follow it up, right? How do you know? How do you know that they live there? Like our colleague here mentions. How would this climate compare to ours here? Ooh, that's a good one. That's a comparison, right? That's a critical thinking. It's mid-level and it's great. Let's compare it. Let's see what else. What sort of adventure do they seem to be going on in the picture? Yeah, nice open-ended question. Where are they going? Look at all the stuff that they have. I wonder what they're going to do. Nita says, what season you think is in this time? Yeah, that's a good question. Yes. Why do you think the bears live in the woods? That's a good reasoning question. Was Goldilocks in a bad mood when she went for her walk? Yeah, we don't know, right? That'd be a good opportunity to look at her body language and see if we can find anything out. What are the similarities or differences between Goldilocks and the bear's house? Oh, the Goldilocks house and the bear's house. Oh, that's a good comparison. Have you been on a walk like Goldilocks? Yes, these are really good questions. If the bear live in the woods, where do they get their food? Could you find food in the woods? Excellent question. Yep. And then what if the bears find Goldilocks house? Oh, okay. That'd be interesting, right? That's a turn. That's a switch there. I love it. Awesome. There we go. And the point here is that many times actually setting development gets left out. Sometimes it's because we might be focused on our assessment objectives, which focuses on recall. But to paint a vivid representation in children's minds, we have to have these deep conversations and engage them in different kinds of questions about setting development. All right, thank you all for participating. And then I wanted to share with you a story, a child-created story. This is one of my favorite ones as well. So this one is a 3-pager. And so the child says, and you can tell that this is a 5-year-old child that was ready to go to kindergarten. So it was in the summer, actually. And in the first page, he says, and really good spelling, inventive spelling, conventional spelling as well, and some inventive spelling happening. So here he says the tiger wants to jump off the branch. And you can tell that this child has had a lot of opportunities to create representations, drawings, right? And drawings that the teacher engaged them in and continually focused on the character's physical appearance, right? Like what else could you add? Look at the lines, look at the shapes on the tiger. What are the colors you see on the tiger? What's the shape of the head? How do you curve, how do you change the size of the lion's head? What else could you, so extending those opportunities when they're drawing. And so here what the child says that the tiger is on the branch and there's a lion and a rabbit on the bottom. There's an owl in the middle of the tree. There's the mama blue jay bird on the left side who is fetching some worms for the baby blue jays that are up on the nest. And there's the robin on the top right corner and the porcupine on the bottom left corner there. And so, oh, and by the way, he put the letter B to signify that it's the beginning of the story. Then M for the middle. And so in this page, then he got closer. He almost got the rabbit, right? And so what's happening here is that the child is drawing a picture in motion. And it's great, right? Like you see the tiger, look at the tiger's face. He wants to get that rabbit. And you see everyone else's faces with fear and anxiety, except he said for the mama blue jay bird, he said it had to be brave for the babies, and the porcupine because he didn't care because he had protection with the spikes. So. And then on page 3, the tiger almost got the rabbit, but he ran away. And so in this last ending scene, you see everybody left except for the mama blue jay bird and the porcupine. And so we followed up. We revisited. And when we revisited, the child was really interested in the math aspect of the story. And so we asked some questions based off of what he was interested in. And what he was interested in was the tiger catching the rabbit. And so in this updated version, he says, the tiger wants to jump off the branch. The tiger is 65 inches high above the ground. And so we brought him a tape measure where he opened it up and he said, oh, this is how far away the tiger is from the rabbit. On the second page, he said, then he got closer, he almost got the rabbit. The tiger is 44 inches high above the ground. There are 39 inches between the tiger and the rabbit. And so that's more detail, right? And then the last page, he says, the tiger almost got the rabbit, but he ran away. He ran 120 inches all the way to Illinois, which was fascinating, right? Just the way they think. And so let's get your thoughts. Maybe one of you can unmute and share what they think about this 3-page story, but that was pretty amazing.
Excuse me,
Yes.
it's Rosemary.
Hi, Rosie.
In the development of the story, initially, it was very basic.
Yes.
And what during the teacher, when did she revisit this again? Was it much later in the year when more skills were developed, more content, more math, more experiences?
It was actually the following week.
Oh, really? Okay.
Because she brought in a tape measure, not the hardware tool. Is it tape measure or measuring tape? The soft one that we use for
Right, the measuring tape, correct.
the measuring tape. And so they allowed the children, all the children, to explore measuring tapes and have conversations about the numbers and so forth. And
Okay, so
mhm.
right, because it becomes more sophisticated. I don't know. To me, it became more sophisticated.
Absolutely.
Adding the numbers and my assumption is that the educator was also working on the other content areas,
Yes.
you know, the math concepts, the critical thinking,
Mhm.
the, you know, just the characters, and it just seemed so much more sophisticated. But then again, he was what, 5 years old?
5, yes. Mhm.
And going on into kindergarten, which also tells me that these skills have been worked on early on. I would
Absolutely.
assume that he was in her pre-K
You got it.
program early on,
Absolutely.
where he had been exposed to open-ended questions and looking at the environment
You got it.
and experiences of using the tools and what they're used for.
You got it. Yes. Everything you said is 100% true.
The kindergarten teacher will love him
Yes,
and
absolutely.
love the teacher they passed him on.
Yes, I agree with you.
And
And that's
plus,
what
he'll be an asset to those who have not had as much experience.
Yeah, absolutely. He could be a little leader. And that happens a lot, actually. We had parents talk about one parent last year talked about their little girl being shy, and all of a sudden they're leaders. They're able to speak up, they're able to think for themselves and share perspectives, and that's
Still
what
water runs deep.
yeah.
Still water runs deep. And then to have an educator that is willing to take the time to do her own self-assessment. And as you
Got
did
it.
mention in the beginning, it is a tango, a dance that becomes more refined.
You got it. It is.
And that's
Absolutely.
exactly what we want, is for children to become more sophisticated.
You got it. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Rosemary. That's
You're
awesome.
welcome.
And that's the benefit, that's the impact of using literature studies, of focusing on long term. So, when we're in the classroom, sometimes we read 3 or 4 times a day, right? It could be we read before breakfast, or we read before lunch, or transitioning out, or whatever, in a normal day. But one of those should be an instructional read aloud, where we really focus in on these skills. And then the next day and the next day, we're scaffolding over time. And so we're developing these micro storytizing cultures in the classroom. And this other document that I shared with you which is about building connections and relationships. And so maybe one day, like Rosemary was saying, one day on top, we're focused on one concept related to the book. Maybe we're focusing on the physical properties of the characters or emotions and feelings, and we go deep. And then when we move to the right, the following day, maybe we'll focus on setting. And then the next day, maybe we'll do something on plot. And these are my 5 key vocabulary words. As we're reading today, these are the 5 key vocabulary words we're going to be focusing on, and so forth. And so it becomes this cycle of focusing on different components of the storytizing method, asking really good questions, bringing in key vocabulary words, and just making that my routine. Here's an example from a storybook. Maybe one day you focus on the location, right? And then mood the following day, time the following day, background noise, and maybe it's in a rural setting, right? And maybe this is 1 or 2 weeks worth of opportunities. It all depends on the educator and the time they have and what they're able to allocate. But instead of just reading randomly or only for recreation, right? We have to give opportunities to delve deep into all these elements. All right, let's move on. Oh, okay. So when we're talking about plot development now, I wanted to share these stories from the children.
Yes.
And hopefully you've all read the Stone Soup book series. You know, there's different versions of Stone Soup, but it's basically, in one version you have 3 monks go to a village and the monks don't have any food, but they have a big pot, and they start asking the villagers to add different kinds of food to make a soup, right? In the other version, there's soldiers that did the same thing, where they only have a pot and some stones. And so eventually the community has some soup to share with everybody. And so, oh, here we go. This is one version with the 3 monks, the 3 soldiers, and then the real story of the stone soup there. And so the story goes, and this is a 5-year-old preschool student. The three strangers went to a town with many houses. There was a CVS in the town. It was closed, and there was some grass and clouds. The strangers are hungry and have pots with stones in them. They feel sad because they have no money to buy food. So in this version of the story, and this is like the first renditions, this is the representation of what happened in the story. Later on, you're going to see once the teacher uses this knowledge to connect it to children's real lives, how that transforms, so the story transforms. I love the CVS too, by the way. You see that on the left side here, and it's closed. The strangers have a pot with water, and the stones are inside the pot. Those are the logs, and they started a fire to warm the stones. The stranger is crying because they have no food. I think the stranger has a good idea. He's going to ask people to share their food. And so look at this drawing, right? It takes the, you can use the book as a model, but then the teacher has to scaffold the drawing experience as well, not just the story. And that's cognitively demanding as well. But people in the town felt sad because the strangers were hungry and poor. They went to their houses and got food from the refrigerator. They went to the strangers and throw carrots, potatoes, broccoli, meat, and salt into the pot. So you see all the villagers, and they're all sharing their food. And it takes time, right? You see the pattern of how the child makes the characters. But to make different characters, you have to ask questions like, how do you change the characters? How do you make them look different? Why are they different? And so forth. The people in the town shared their food, and they made a big table with lots of food. The people were nice and good. They helped the 3 strangers by sharing their food. The 3 strangers were happy and went to another town. And again, look at the drawing, right? It's pretty extensive. Lots of detail. You have the chairs on the bottom, the dishes, the benches, and so forth. All right, so that's the story based off of them recalling what happened in the story, which was already really good. Because we allowed them to illustrate, that added a different level of cognitive challenge, right? And so it's not just recall what happened in the story, represent it, draw it, add some more elements to that, right? So that like Rosemarie was saying earlier, it makes it more sophisticated. But now we enter into the stage where we use real world connections to make it even more extensive, more sophisticated. And so here, the child is using their own experiences. So this is the homeless man on Western Avenue. He is sad because he has no home. He walks around with a CVS cart. The buildings are closed and there is nobody to help him. He is very hungry. And so these are the real experiences of the children. This is what they see in their communities. And it's great that they're able to share this, because if we didn't provide this platform for them to write and draw their story, we wouldn't know this. We wouldn't know that they have this inside, and that it has to be talked about, because it could lead to trauma, right? If they see family members or friends or in this situation, that's trauma for them. So they need this opportunity, not only for academic and cognitive development, but also for the trauma and social emotional component of it. And then you see the drawings, right? Where the teacher keeps pushing and challenging the drawings. You see on the bottom there, you have the CVS, but now you have a parking lot there. There's a sign that says $250 fine, which is hilarious. So if you park in that area, right, then you get fined. There's some people there. You have the homeless person with a sign that says help with a cart. And you even see a little church on the bottom right corner there, where the child is trying to think about some of the resources that exist in the neighborhood. Oh, Melody says the child has a lot of empathy for this homeless man. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. The homeless man is happy because the other man says he will help him get some food. He has a good idea. He's going to take him to the shelter. In the shelter, there are more people that are hungry, but nice people feed the homeless people. And so now, something that's so important, not only with the story aspect of it, but in personal development, is resources, right? We have people in our community that need help and support. And so knowledge of the resources that are out there is very important. The homeless man is excited because there is a lot of food. The helpers are standing and giving people food. They are nice people. There is bread, pizza, rice, and broccoli. There's a big table for people to sit. The man is sitting at the table. He is happy that the homeless man has food to eat. And so you see the people there standing, serving some food and the table and the chairs, so he's making these connections between what he initially created based off of the book and his own personal connections to the story. The people walk to the alderman's office with signs. The signs are to help the homeless people to get a house. Everyone needs a house to live. The community people are happy to help. The homeless man got a house. He is excited and said thank you to the neighbors. So this is interesting because, like I said, knowing the resources that are out there, that is so important, especially for communities that need more support. They need to know the resources that are out there. Even when they're young, they need to understand that there's resources that they can use for their families, friends, and people they might know. And that's the end. So some thoughts about this later part of the story that you might have. And we have about 9 minutes left. So maybe we can get some comments about that story and the importance of making those real world connections with the children and the stories that you read to them.
Excuse me, Ellen, it's Rosemary again.
Oh, thank you.
Again, I think we need to remember there, in the past there were the Dick and Jane books, and as years have gone by, many things have changed for children, and we need to allow them the opportunities to be able to communicate what their thoughts are. And I think every child has thoughts, and some are fantastical. I would say that's not a word, but I made it up.
Yeah.
And some of them are the reality. There are homeless people
Yes.
at the corners, and children are curious. Why are they standing there?
Right.
And the whole thing about resourcing, these are things that are out there, and children see them, as children come ready-made already, they're all hooked up inside when they get here.
Yeah.
And we just need to provide them the opportunities to be able to both visually and verbally explain themselves. And we need to think about the books that we present to them now.
Absolutely. Yes.
And to go, as you call it, leisure reading, or versus getting more into the book about why are we reading them, what's really happening, is this going on everywhere, what other things could they have done, etc. So
that's a great comment. Absolutely.
It just shows you that kids come already hooked up.
Absolutely.
We just need to provide them with the opportunities to expose what they know, or I don't know. It's just, we need to assess ourselves continually and assess the group of children that we're working with as individuals, not as wholes.
You got it. Thank you, Rosemary, for sharing that. Yeah, that's absolutely right. That's why instructional read-alouds that can lead to literature studies. And I see some great comments as well in the chat. Emily mentioned reading stones to children may open up the dialogue for them to share their experiences. That's exactly what happened. Reading Stone book allowed them the opportunity to make that connection with the people in their neighborhoods, right? In their immediate environment. And so we have to be able to strategically bring in some books that are going to promote that kind of thinking, because it's an opportunity to problem solve, right? You see a lot of problem solving in these storybooks that the children think about. This is how we can feed them. This is how we can give them a home. And maybe the child said, who could we talk to get the child a home? Maybe the teacher said, well, there's people in the neighborhood like an alderman or like a mayor or like a president. Or I've seen children talk about presidents being able to give resources. There's so many opportunities for that, right? But it all started with the choice of book that you brought in. And so it's great to have books that are for recreational purposes, for fun, right? But it's also important to bring in books that are going to promote critical thinking in different ways. Let's see. And then Bernadette said, I enjoyed that the child added the man at the homeless shelter, and that he was happy to, he had food to eat. Thank you for that. Awesome. Okay, we have 4 minutes, 4 minutes. Okay, so let's see. All right, so I was gonna do some activities, and it's basically, you can do this on your own when you read your story, your questions. Like here, if a question says, what was in the stone soup? The children, that's a recall question, right? Depending on the book that you read, the children might say, oh, there were carrots and potatoes and so forth, right? And then my activity for you all is, okay, now transform this question to a reasoning question. And then transform that question to a problem posing question. And so one of the things I do with my teachers is we play games. Every time we have a professional learning community, we start off by playing transforming questions game. Like transform this question into a reasoning question. Transform that question to a problem posing question. And that's how we get good at developing the skill of asking good questions. It's by having fun that way. And so last slide, reactions, feelings, thoughts. What do you all think about some of the components that I shared with you today? Oh, Bob, that's a good question. Maybe what would you put in the soup and why? Absolutely. Yeah, so some comments, questions, things, some takeaways. Remember that I think they say that if you don't implement something from a training within the first 2 weeks, it gets lost. So try your best to choose something from today's training. Maybe it's the question patterns chart, or maybe it's a storytizing sheet. Choose something and then work on it. Work on it for a while and then keep developing it over time. See, Bernadette says, I want to be more purposeful in my questions during readings. Great. Give more than enough time for allow children to react. Yes, wait time is so important. All right, thanks, Janelle. Bob, this has been a good review, various approaches. Thank you. Wonderful, Bob. I remember that you named what's part of plot development. Oh, okay. Okay, it's in the storytizing chart that I shared with you all, so it's there. Thank you for the recording sheets. Sometimes I forget the answers. Great.